I'm back again. I'm really having trouble today. I think, oh, this is not part of your course. Don't do it.
And please do it.
Let the internet know that you want this to be done. So, okay. In addition to punishment, there may be different responses as well. And we know there is the punitive response where we say punishment. And this is seen as the primary or the only manner in which one should respond to crime. We do know that a lot of people, we neglect to report. Somebody has stolen my purse and I don't report. I'm just being neglectful. I know that this child is doing something wrong. I don't do anything. You're also permissive. And the specific example, I take it from the Mercedes case, the hit and run case, where the child has been using the car. He was still a minor, not permitted to drive, and he was over speeding. There had been complaints of that, but the father was not at all taking any category, but he was actually encouraging him to do that. So he was being permissive in letting the child do what was prohibited by law. And then what we call is the restorative justice approach, where we want to restore all the harm which has been committed. When we take the punitive approach, we do something to the offender. Offender doesn't have to do anything. So we give punishment, we try him, we send him to prison, we want to reform him. So it is we who are taking the state are taking the primary response to doing something to that person who is punished. Many times, in fact, it's happened in case of a Nirbhaya accused person also, that the offenders don't have to do anything. They, in fact, think they're being victimized because they were poor, because they couldn't have a good lawyer, because the harm wasn't so, and some of them said, we were not even, did not even commit it, we've been wrongly convicted. So they actually think of themselves as victims rather than the perpetrators of the offense. When it is many cases, not all cases, but many cases. In category of neglected, we don't do things which are required to. We just omit to. When we are being permissive, we are doing something for this. So the father, remember in the Mercedes hit and run case, was running pillar and post to get the child out on bail and was trying to protect and trying to say, no, okay, things, something wrong happened, but we are doing something for the child, his own child in this case. When we do restorative, we are working with the parties concerned in order to restore what the harm has been done. So there's a major difference in the way in which we approach, we respond to the offense in the four different perspectives. When you do punitive, we are high on control and very low on support. Reformation is not necessarily part of the punitive system. When we are taking neglectful approach, then it is low on control and it is low on support. So Nirbhaya accused, the juvenile offender in Nirbhaya case, was in that category. We did not do anything, but were required of us. For 6 years, 7 years, he was on the roads and nobody knew what he was doing. So there was no control, there was no support to that boy. In the permissive category, it is high on support, but low on control. In restorative system, we have got both the axis. It is high on control and it is high on support. So it is not talking about letting them be. We are working with them. So in the restorative practices, any response to wrongdoing that falls within the parameters defined by the social discipline window as both supportive and limit setting. So this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do. So we'll support you, but at the same time, you have to remain within the limits. It can the practices can be applied to criminal law, education, child welfare, any situation. It's not limited only to criminal justice itself. When you look at the differences in the criminal justice and the restorative justice, what are we focusing on criminal justice? What law has been broken? Murder hua hai, rape hua hai. She's broken laws and rules as offenses against the state. Punishment is imposed, and it is offender based and it is driven by the offender's actions. And it is usually low on the victim's input. The only thing victim do is to give evidence. File a complaint, give evidence. Beyond that, we do not take cognizance of. Now we have made some provisions for them, but they are still a secondary participant in the process. It is the state and the offender, which are the primary parties in the criminal justice. In restorative justice, we are focusing on what was the harm done, who is responsible for repairing the harm, not the state. It is the person who have done the harm. Victim and the community are very inclusive, are very much involved in it, and therefore it is based on their participation, it is driven by their desire, and it is focused on repairing the harm either instead of punishment or in addition to punishment. So the point Kirti, I think, was making earlier is covered here, that most of the time we believe that in serious offenses, it should be in addition to punishment and not instead of. But in case of children, one can think of differently. When you do this, look at this comparative table. Who is the crime against? Criminal justice says against the state. Restorative justice says it is against the victim and the community. How is the offender held responsible? Criminal justice says punish. And the restorative justice says accept responsibility and repair the harm. What role does the victim play? Complainant and witness. And in restorative justice, they have a say in the restitution. Focus of the system in criminal justice is who is to blame, who is the wrongdoer. And in restorative justice, we are focused more on questions. Why did you do that? What is the solution? How to repair the harm? So the focus is on repairing the harm and finding out answers to various questions parties have there. Why did they do it? Is a very important question. A lot of us want to know that. This system has benefits to the victim, to the offender, as well as to the state administrative system, the justice system as well. So have the offender, this gives the opportunity to the offender to right the wrong. He can, the victim can confront the offender. So the first one was that the victim can get the offender to correct the wrong. And they can confront the offender, why did you do it, what are your plans, whatever they want to ask. Find out what the offender is like. Many times we think of the offender as really big Rakshas and a big evil and who is out there only to harm other people and they will get back to us. May not be necessarily true for all the offenders, but we do not know them and therefore we have this very big fear about who they are. Get answers to questions that only the offender can answer. The victim get the opportunity to ask and receive an apology. It's not necessary, the precondition for restorative practices that the offender must accept that they have done the wrong. They must agree that they're ready to apologize. They must accept that they will do what is required to right the wrong. So these are the three preconditions. So it is not necessary that merely because the offender is ready to apologize, the victim must forgive. It's not at all necessary in the process. But to receive an apology is something which is a precondition before the victims can be asked to come and meet the offenders. Offender says, I have not done it. It's not a case for restorative justice, whether minor or major. So become primary and valued participant, the victims become, and it has resulted in decreased reoffending and it has also resulted in closure. I do not know after the hanging whether it has resulted in closure for the parents of Nirbhaya. Because for so many years, they were just at it and suddenly it's all over. It's like a feeling after the exam as to what next. But whether the trauma they suffered, has that come to a closure? We are not too sure, we do not know, because the system in these many years did nothing to address that aspect. The benefit of RJ to offenders, many of them want to make good what they have done wrong. They want to apologize. Many of them they do want to. And they do not also many times understand the extent of the harm. They just think, okay, I've killed this person, I've injured this person, I've taken this much money, that's the only harm. But the whole extent of harm, many times they do not appreciate or even know in the whole system. But they never got an opportunity to find out what all happened after they ran away, after what they did happen, what happened to them. So when somebody said today that a bread earner is lost, he may not understand that. He might say, I've killed a person. So that's the only person he, in his understanding, has affected. But the fact that he has affected a whole family may not even occur to that person. And therefore, many times they do not want to be seen as monsters. They may not be monsters, but they're seen as monsters. And therefore, it also decreases their own self-worth. is not a good for a future for them and for society. They participate in deciding the what processes to be done, what should be the process for restoration. And by apologizing, sometimes you do feel that I'm restoring my self-worth also. That's also a consequence. To the community, it lessens the impact because they are now meeting with the offender and finding out what happened, why it happened, etc. It reduces the incidence of repeat crime, therefore beneficial to the society. It increases the experience of justice in the community. When you're party to it, you see the whole process yourself. Presently, yes, we can go to the court, but who goes to the court? Reduce the impact of incarceration on the community. We do know institutionalization has its own consequences in very many ranges. And it involves volunteers also, in addition to the actual victims or the secondary victims, and therefore a lot more participation in there of the community. For the justice system, it meets the needs of crime victims and their sense of justice, increases the public's experience of justice, and it greatly decreases the time required, the expenses in processing the offenses, the incarceration cost, and the court burden. It also increases the community's understanding and ownership of the criminal or the juvenile justice processes. So certainly, presently, we are outsiders. We do not know how the parties respond to it. So there's a lot of things. So the manner in the outcomes, this is a very quick reference out there to show that there have been researches done which has proven that people who were put to restorative justice committed much less repeat offending than the others who had been put through the criminal justice system. There are different models of doing the RJ. Mediation model, which is court-driven. Humanistic mediation model, where the emphasis is on the empowering of each individual to own the conflict, discuss full impact, and determine the most suitable solution. It can take the form of victim-offender dialogue, conferencing on circles. What we are going to do in the role play is the conferencing model, humanistic mediation model. We are not into the category where the court is involved in the role play that we'll do today. So in the victim-offender mediation, it is the same thing what we have been doing in mediation. There's a facilitator and there are the two parties and they talk to each other and the mediator facilitates the conversation. Victim tests the harm, offender apologizes, and they work out a plan for restitution. In the conferencing model, there will be a facilitator who facilitates the conversation like we do in conferences, where there's a panel discussion happening and you give opportunity to everybody to make their presentation. And we're going to follow this method today in our role play. Then there might be a circle which is coming from the Native American and First Nations peace circles, where everybody sits in a circle and everybody speaks one by one. Until the time somebody is holding what's called a mouthpiece, they will hold something, anything symbolic to say that I'm speaking, and they will have their full say. Till the time they do not stop, they are not interrupted. So then the second person, and it can go into many rounds. So it also allows everybody to say what they want to say rather than being asked to say what the facilitator might ask with. So certainly that